Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start, may I take this time to remind everyone of our house rules and reminders for today's events. To our participants, number one, be respectful. Please treat the presenter and other attendees with respect. Avoid interrupting or engaging in side conversations that are visible to everyone. Nonetheless, of course, we are operating under a Zoom conference format, so none of the attendees' video feeds are on, only the speakers. So second reminder, if you do have any questions during the Q&A portion of the program, kindly type your questions briefly and clearly in the chat box. And preferably, please identify yourself and your affiliation as well. Thirdly, participants are requested to virtually remain in the webinar until the end. Fourth, we would also like to remind you that the webinar will be recorded and uploaded by the organizers as indicated in the data privacy disclaimer in the registration of the webinar. However, participants are not allowed to record the session separately. Fifth, if you have any concerns or queries, you may direct them at the Q&A function later in this event. Lastly, please continue to observe proper decorum throughout the sessions. All right. Good morning, everyone. Good day to all our participants who have joined today's event. Fax Asia warmly welcomes you all to this webinar, the ASEAN Outlook, Regional Outlook for 2026-2030, Charting the Next 5 Years with Fax. This session with the theme, Navigating Great Power Competition in Regional Security Resilience, is the first of a two-part series designed to provide an analysis of the region by dissecting the regional security and political context. Today's webinar is brought to you by Facts Asia, a nonprofit organization based in the Philippines with the aim to provide and host expert events and analysis on foreign and public policies to be utilized by stakeholders and policymakers. It's our goal, in fact, to be a platform, an avenue for unique Southeast Asian perspectives on matters relating to international affairs. My name is Justin Bakisal, National Security Analyst at Fax Asia. I'll be your host and moderator for today's program, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. This series takes place in a context where Southeast Asia is operating in an increasingly complex and contested geopolitical landscape. The challenges facing ASEAN are manifold and could be classified into 6 broad categories. Number 1, the growing US-China competition in the Asia-Pacific. Number 2, the persistence of intra-ASEAN territorial conflicts, as we saw last year with Thailand and Cambodia's border skirmishes. Thirdly, the maritime disputes in the South China Sea. Fourth, the military modernizations undertaken by ASEAN states over the past decade or so. Fifth, the uncertainty and strife by demands for domestic political change across the region. And sixth, the localized impact of ASEAN of conflicts around the globe, be it from oil price shocks, energy security, supply chain disruption, and so forth. ASEAN is therefore beset by a myriad of problems with no easy solutions, and it needs to develop robust mechanisms to handle various crises. It's therefore critical that we examine the future of regional security, not just through the lens of statecraft, but also by addressing the latent and active flashpoints across the region. We are joined today by 3 esteemed speakers who will be given 15 to 20 minutes each to discuss their viewpoints and insights, as well as their respective countries' perspectives. Our three speakers are from Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand, so we hope to get a diverse set of perspectives on the regional outlook this year and in the medium term until 2030. Before I introduce them, our organizers have requested a quick photo session. My colleague Lisa will be taking a few screenshots, and please let us know once you've captured them.
All right, thank you. We can go ahead.
Thank you. Perfect. Now let's start delving into the relevant discussion as I introduce our first speaker for today's webinar, Dr. Dharm Sukhontasap. Dr. Dharm is an advisory board member of the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation and a member of the board of directors of the International Institute on Trade and Development, jointly established by the UN and the government of Thailand. Dr. Dharm specializes in international political, economic, and trade issues in the Asia-Pacific region, with a special reference to ASEAN. He has recently completed his term as director and subsequently chairman of the executive board of the Export-Import Bank of Thailand. He is a Fulbright, John E. Perinofoy, and Manuel Alcazar scholar. Dr. Dharm received his doctorate degree in law and diplomacy from the Fletcher School, Tufts University. Let's all welcome Dr. Dharm Sukhontasap. You may have the floor, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Justin. Thank you for the kind invitation from FACTS for me to attend this timely discussion. Today, I will briefly review the global and regional political, economic, and trade landscape for 2026 and beyond. And the reason why I'm doing this is because before we discuss the political and security landscape in the region, I believe that we should also look at the other factors that are influencing the developments that are happening around the world and in our region. Our focus today, therefore, is on the global and regional dynamics that will define this year and beyond, and how all that will impact the ASEAN region. To begin, in my view, we are currently operating in an era of geopolitical and geoeconomic fragmentation. As you can see from the conflict watch list, there are several evolving crisis areas, including the ongoing Ukraine war, the instability in Syria, the rising military situation in Pakistan. We are also tracking the U.S. hard power politics in Latin America and persistent civil wars in the Sudan and massive civil unrest in Iran. In Asia Pacific region alone, we have a very long list, such as the first island chain tension between the US and China and other countries in that chain, such as Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. The Korean Peninsula will remain a delicate flashpoint, with North Korea's nuclear program forcing a tighter US-Seoul Tokyo security cooperation. The Taiwan Straits and South China Sea, where the gray zone tactics are being implemented and being intensified. There are more blockades, there are more cyber attack activities in that part of the world. Myanmar civil war, as we know, elections, the first phase of the elections have taken place, and the rest, two other elections are in process, but the fighting also continues. On top of that, we have the new Republic of Kortule, which adds in more complications to the situation in the country at this point. And last but not least, the Thai-Cambodia territorial conflict, which have dragged on since July of last year. Peace remains uncertain under a fragile ceasefire, Meanwhile, there are over 600,000 displaced persons on both sides of the border, and the military casualties were high. Despite the above geopolitical shocks, the global economy shows a degree of resilience. We expect global GDP to grow between 2.6 to 3.2% in 2026. This growth is being powered by two main engines: AI-led productivity gains and a push for domestic energy independence in major economies. However, this resilience is balanced against significant risks, especially trade fragmentation and record high levels of global debt. When we look at the regional breakdowns, we see that North America is seeing moderate growth of 1.8 to 2%. Europe is struggling with a sluggish recovery of 1.1% to 1.5%. Asia Pacific remains the most dynamic but faces mixed results. India is leading the charge with 6 to 6.5%, while China continued to slow down at 4.4. This is a slowdown from an estimated 4.8 to 5% in 2025. Japan's economy is expected to grow only at around 1%, while South Korea is expected to grow at 1.8 to 2.3%. The economy of both countries is expected to be based on technology and AI driven. ASEAN as a region, the GDP growth is expected at 4.1 to 4.4%, led by Vietnam at 6.4% and the Philippines at 5.3%. Thailand is expected to trail behind the pack with only 1.6%. The challenges for 2026 and beyond are structural. We are seeing a move away from labor cost advantage towards access to energy and the primary competitive edge, which is now based on the needs for raw materials and minerals. Furthermore, the rise of sovereign technology policies and carbon border adjustments, or CBAM, are adding new layers of regulatory complexity to every global business. Now, let's dive deeper into the regional trade policies. In North America, the environment is increasingly volatile. The U.S. has expanded protectionist measures, including the renegotiations of the USMCA. For businesses here, tariffs are no longer the temporary hurdles. They are being treated as permanent operational costs. In Europe, the strategy has shifted towards what some call fortress industrial policy. The EU is focusing on strategic autonomy, imposing strict reciprocity rules on foreign investors to protect domestic green technology, IT, and electric vehicle industries from the Chinese overcapacity. In the Asia-Pacific region, the narrative is dominated by the second China shock, a flood of low-cost, high-tech goods from China that is pressuring ASEAN markets, while countries like Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia are benefiting from the China plus one supply chain shift. But they're also facing stricter rules of origin intended to prevent tariff evasion, which complicates their production networks and supply chain. Next, we have entered the era of transactional nationalism. The days of multilateralism are largely over. Countries now favor smaller groups or bilateral deals to seek strategic advantages. Global tariff now average 19%, and for goods coming out of China, those rates can reach 60% in the foreseeable future if the reciprocal tariff of the US remains. Governments are using reciprocal trade acts as political tools, essentially matching the tariff of their partners. We are also seeing a massive push for reshoring, driven by state subsidies and local content requirements. Reshoring, for some of you, it means that factories, manufacturing bases are moving back to their home country. The impact on supply chain is profound. We see an average global consumer price increase of 5.4% directly reflecting by those tariff costs. To mitigate the risk, businesses are moving away from just-in-time to just-in-case inventory models, which adds more financial burdens to the businesses. One bright spot is the rise of tokenized cross-border payments, which are helping to decentralize trade finance, even as the physical movement of goods become more restricted. But as we all know, digital currencies would require a new set of international control mechanisms for them in the very near future. Now, let me turn a bit to Thailand, not because I'm from Thailand, but more because Thailand, I believe, represents the situation in many developing countries in this part of the world. Now, turning to Thailand in 2026, it is a year of balancing acts. We are seeing an export slowdown. Many exports were front-loaded in 2025 to dodge the 19% US tariff, leaving a gap this year. Ongoing negotiations with the US are tense, with Thailand having to make concessions on a number of sectors. Of course, we are all waiting to see the ruling of the US Supreme Court on reciprocal tariff and its consequences. But while we're doing that, traditional manufacturing is contracting due to cheap imports. Thailand's electronic sectors look positive, and it is in a good position to be included in the global AI supply chain. Tourism is recovering, but it's a gradual and uneven process. This year, we expect 35 to 38 million arrivals. Interestingly, an increase in Indian visitors is helping to offset the slower growth from the Chinese market. To combat these pressures, the Ignite Thailand, which is the global industrial and logistic hub, uh, uh, what's the word? Ambition of the Thai government. The initiative is in full swing. The goal is also to transform Thailand into a global financial center through virtual banking, while pushing heavy investment into EVs, batteries, and AI-driven manufacturing. Success here will depend on managing the strain on the energy grid in the Eastern Seaboard Corridor, develop skilled workers on AI and IT, and addressing high levels of household debt while dragging down household consumption. I'm sorry, the household debts, which is dragging down the household consumption. So in summary, in my view, 2026 is defined by a world that is highly fragmented, both in terms of geopolitical and geoeconomics, which would increase the friction among states, whether it is navigating the regional conflicts, the second China shock, or the permanent nature of reciprocal tariff. The key to thriving in this environment is agility and adaptability. For Thailand and the broader Asia-Pacific region, the focus must remain on innovation and strategic realignment to stay competitive in a world of competing interests and competing trade blocs. So thank you very much for your time. That is about it for my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Darm. So just to summarize the key highlights, right? I really like the presentation because it touched a lot on the geoeconomic aspect, which a lot of analysts have been highlighting lately. Because as we've seen, for example, with US and Chinese foreign policy, the security aspect is intimately linked to the geoeconomic coercive aspects of this. And the presentation really summed up the economic drivers of the conflicts today, including the rising tariffs, the trade friction, and of course, the drive for energy access across different countries. And also what that means in terms of the interstice between national security and economic policy, particularly what Dr. Darm has mentioned as a fortress industrial policy by the EU and the US against what it perceives as a second China shock from cheap high-tech exports coming from China that are basically practically flooding the market right now. And then secondly, he also highlighted the impact on Southeast Asia of the China plus one supply chain shift, which is particularly relevant for Thailand, Vietnam, and of course Malaysia, and how they are caught in between China on the one hand and also U.S. sanctions on the other. As Dr. Darm mentioned, the emphasis on the country of origin for production, given U.S. sanctions or against Chinese produced goods. And finally, of course, he also touched on transactional nationalism, that he said, of course, would be linking economic strategy to national security. So as we've seen in the presentation, there's a lot of emphasis on the securitization of economic policy as the world shifts from what Dr. Darm assesses from the multilateral to bilateral shifts. Now, later on in the Q&A, we can touch a bit on what this means for ASEAN, because naturally the question for ASEAN is, if the world is shifting toward bilateral deals and transactionalism, how can we maintain ASEAN centrality in a world where there is immense pressure for countries to cut a deal bilaterally with partner countries such as the US or China? And of course, in a recent ASEAN Outlook Forum in Singapore, former Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said, there's of course been proposals in past years for ASEAN minus and ASEAN consensus, depending on the type of issue, whether it's a security or an economic issue. So we can talk about that later in the question and answer portion. Thank you, Dr. Darm. Now that our first speaker has given us his insights, let's proceed to the next speaker. We have Dr. Noor Shahada. Dr. Noor Shahada Jamil is a convener of the FACTS Asia Malaysia program. She is a senior lecturer at the Institute of China Studies at the University of Malaya. She is concurrently a co-convener of the East Asian International Relations Caucus, which is a research platform for exchange, engagement, and empowerment among foreign affairs professionals in Malaysia. Her research concentrates on China's foreign policy, South China Sea, and the Belt and Road Initiative, the Southeast Asian security, and East Asian affairs. Dr. Noor was a recipient of the Taiwan Fellowship in 2017 and Korea's National Diplomatic Academy's ASEAN Fellowship in 2023. Finally, she also served as a member of the writing team of the Government of Malaysia's inaugural Defense White Paper. So let's all welcome Dr. Noor Shahada.
Thank you very much, Justin. Nice to see you again after the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much to FACTS Asia as well for the invitation. It's actually my great honor to join this important discussion on ASEAN's regional outlook for the next 5 years. And for me, the next 5 years would be a time where Southeast Asia is actually navigating one of the most complex strategic environments since the end of Cold War. And for the period of 2026 until 2030, I think this would be a defining phase for ASEAN. For one, I think it would test the organization's ability to preserve not only ASEAN centrality, but also our ability to manage the so-called intensifying great power rivalry, and also how can we maintain regional stability while adapting to profound technological and also economic transformation. And for the case of Malaysia, this period would be equally consequential. It would be equally crucial for Malaysia because, as we all know, Malaysia have just concluded our ASEAN chairmanship, and I believe that Malaysia will not only be expected to preserve the momentum that it helped created or generate during our chairmanship, but also expected to demonstrate our continuous support to ASEAN and also our ASEAN fellow member states in navigating an increasingly fragmented international order. So in my remarks today, I will focus on mainly three interrelated strategic questions. First is on how can Malaysia sustain our diplomatic momentum after our ASEAN chairmanship, while at the same time preserving ASEAN unity and also our interests in the South China Sea. The second question would be on how emerging technologies are actually reshaping Malaysia's foreign and also security policy calculus. And last but not least would be on how Malaysia navigate the intensifying great power competition for the next 5 years, meaning from 2026 until 2030, while at the same time balancing our economic imperative and also security interests. So for the first question on how can Malaysia sustain our post-chairmanship momentum without diluting ASEAN's collective leverage, I personally think that Malaysia's ASEAN chairmanship demonstrated a very clear diplomatic philosophy. So the philosophy is pragmatic and also balanced engagement. And Malaysia has long pursued a pragmatic, multi-directional foreign policy rooted in economic diplomacy and also strategic autonomy. It is true that China remains important because it has been our largest trading partner since 2009. So they has been our largest trading partner for more than a decade. And you can see that our cooperation with China actually extended across different dimensions and also different sectors, including infrastructure, manufacturing, digital economy, green economy, even green technology. But the point is, China is not our only or sole partner. We, at the same time, has also cultivated strong economic ties with other major partners, including the United States, Japan, South Korea, and the EU. And at the same time, also advancing ASEAN's collective interests. But the challenge now for the next 5 years is, how can we sustain such momentum without weakening ASEAN's collective bargaining position? And the dilemma is not something new. We have been always trying to balance economic pragmatism with strategic caution. And the difference now is that the stakes are now higher because China is no longer merely just an economic partner to many of us, but it is a strategic actor with expanding military, technological, and also maritime capabilities. So for Malaysia, I think our foreign policy approach has historically been characterized by quiet diplomacy rather than megaphone diplomacy, de-escalation rather than confrontation, and also engagement rather than containment. So such approach has allowed Malaysia to maintain our functional relations with all major powers while avoiding entrapment in bloc politics. But between year 2026 until 2030, for the next 5 years, what Malaysia needs to do is that we need to ensure that bilateral pragmatism does not erode ASEAN's collective credibility. So to achieve this, 3 priorities would be essential. First, Malaysia must continue to strengthen ASEAN institutional mechanism. So this will include reinforcing ASEAN-led security architectures, particularly the ARF, the EAS, the ADMM+, and many more, as the primary platform for managing strategic competition and also regional affairs. Second, Malaysia should support a more coordinated ASEAN maritime diplomacy because our fragmented position in the South China Sea have long weakened our negotiating leverage. So I think Malaysia can actually play a bridging role by encouraging confidence-building measures, operational transparency, and hopefully also the renewed momentum of the Code of Conduct negotiation. And third, Malaysia must maintain principled consistency, meaning that pragmatism, we should understand it does not mean strategic ambiguity. So we have consistently upheld UNCLOS and we also promote peaceful dispute settlement. So this kind of principle should also remain as the anchor of our maritime diplomacy. So in short, Malaysia's challenge after the chairmanship is to evolve from just being a convener to becoming a strategic stabilizer so that we can ensure that ASEAN would remain relevant across time, and it will remain credible and unified in a more contested regional order. So that's on my first point. And on the second question on how emerging technologies actually shape or reshape Malaysia's foreign policy or play a role in our foreign policy transformation, I think we would all agree that technology is no longer simply just an economic sector. It has slowly becoming a strategic domain as well. So it does play a role in help shaping national competitiveness. It does play a role in our defense capabilities, intelligence gathering, and of course, they do have this influence in terms of geopolitics in the region. And based on my observation, I think three technological trends are especially relevant for the case of Malaysia. So the first trend would be on AI and also digital sovereignty. AI will reshape diplomacy. There's no doubt about that, right? It will reshape diplomacy, it will reshape our defense planning, our intelligence analysis, and even our economic competitiveness. So for Malaysia, this actually raises critical questions of data governance. How do we govern all this data? It also raises questions about cyber resilience, digital sovereignty, and also strategic dependence on foreign technology ecosystem. So I would foresee that Malaysia's foreign policy will increasingly intersect with digital governance, from data localization to AI ethics to cybersecurity cooperation and also to digital trade frameworks. And all this development, they will further push Malaysia to become more active in pushing for regional cyber confidence building measures, for instance. It will also push us to diversify our digital infrastructure partnership with not only China and the United States, but also some regional partners like Japan, South Korea, and EU. And the second trend would be on defense modernization and also network-centric warfare. So at this point of time, we can see that Malaysia's defense posture is gradually shifting towards maritime domain awareness. We're also talking about integrated surveillance system, cyber defense capabilities, and also, of course, autonomous and also unmanned system. So it means that emerging technologies will shape our naval and also air force modernization, especially when we're going to deploy or use this in monitoring the South China Sea, in safeguarding critical sea lanes like the Strait of Malacca, and also to responding to gray zone activities in this region. So all this will reinforce the strategic importance of defense industry cooperation, for instance. And it will also reinforce the importance of technology transfer partnership, joint training, and also interoperability of our systems and also weapons. And on the third trend, in terms of technology, I would think that it will involve energy transition and also green technology, because Malaysia has this national energy transition roadmap, which position the country as a regional hub for renewable energy, green hydrogen, EV ecosystem, and also carbon markets. So with that, I think in the coming few years, energy diplomacy would be a core component of our foreign policy. And therefore, partnership with regional partners, as I mentioned earlier, not only China and also the United States, but also Japan, South Korea, and many more, will increasingly focus on green supply chain and climate financing. So this will create new strategic interdependence that goes beyond traditional trade and investment in terms of our partnership and also cooperation. So to sum up, I think Malaysia's foreign policy is becoming more technocratic. It is becoming more specialized, and it is more security conscious. So diplomacy is no longer just about managing states. It's now also about managing ecosystem of technology, finance, data, and also infrastructure. And on my last point, or the question on how will Malaysia navigate the intensifying great power competition for the next 5 years while balancing our economic imperative and also security interests? I think we will all agree that the defining strategic reality for the next 5 years for ASEAN or for Southeast Asia would be the great power contention. between China and also the United States. And Southeast Asia will be the central theater for this competition. So for Malaysia, and I think for the whole Southeast Asia, such competition present not only opportunity, but they also presented us with risks. But on the opportunity side, I think one good thing is that with China in on board or in the play, we will benefit in terms of economic partnership and also development, because China remains as our largest trading partner and also major investor in many sectors. But on the other hand, the US also remain as our critical security partner, technology leader, and also export destination. While other regional powers like Japan, South Korea, and EU, they actually provide us with diversification and also rooms for strategic hedging. So that's the good part about this competition. But of course, we can't always look at, it's not always rainbows and butterflies. So we have to talk about the challenges as well as the risks. So the risks we're facing would be strategic bifurcation of supply chain. And if things got worse in the South China Sea, we might see, further militarization of the South China Sea. And we can also expect increased pressure for alignment that might lead to various scenarios, including technology decoupling. So I think Malaysia's strategy for the next 5 years will continue to rest on 3 main pillars based on the background and the scenario that we have just discussed just now. So the first pillar would be strategic hedging. So Malaysia will continue to avoid exclusive alignment. Instead, we will deepen our ties across multiple poles. On one pole, we'll strengthen our economic integration or cooperation with China. On another side of the spectrum, we will strengthen our security cooperation with US and also our partners. We'll start to explore technology partnership with other middle powers or regional powers, and we will also look into defense diplomacy with even our ASEAN member states. So such diversified engagement would reduce vulnerability and also maximize our strategic autonomy. So that's on the pillars on strategic hedging. And the second pillar that we would rely on would be to focus on ASEAN centrality and to promote ASEAN centrality as our strategic shield, because ASEAN does provide Malaysia with diplomatic insulation, and acting collectively would give small and middle states or middle powers greater leverage in the international arena. So I would think that for the next 5 years, Malaysia will have strong interest in preserving ASEAN unity like usual, preventing ASEAN from becoming fragmented along geopolitical lines, and also to keep ASEAN platforms as the default venue for regional security dialogue. And on the last pillar, it would be on defense credibility and also deterrence. So Malaysia non-aligned posture is always associated with our very low profile approach in the foreign policy. But non-aligned and then low profile does not mean strategic passivity. So the Malaysian government do understand that credible defense capabilities is still essential for the country, because this would help to ensure our deterrent, and it's also essential or crucial in maritime domain, in crisis response, in humanitarian aid operation, and of course, more importantly, important for us to preserve and also defend our territorial integrity and also maritime rights. And therefore, for the next 5 years, I think defense diplomacy, joint exercises with our partners, interoperability would be central to our balancing strategy. In fact, I would think that our foreign policy will continue to reflect what scholars call soft alignment, meaning cooperation without formal alliance, engagement without entrapment, and also deterrence without provocation. So to conclude, I would think that the period from 2026 to 2030 would be a defining chapter for not only ASEAN, but also for Malaysia as well. And I think the region and Malaysia continue to face three serious pressures. First, for Malaysia, it would be on how we can sustain our diplomatic momentum after our ASEAN chairmanship. Second, for the region and Malaysia, is how can we adapt to the rapid technological transformation and how we can navigate the power competition and the way Malaysia respond will not only shape our own strategic autonomy, but also ASEAN's relevance in a more polarized world. So, case of Malaysia, I think our greatest strength actually lies in our deep tradition. So, we are pragmatic but principled. We are non-aligned but engaged. We're open but strategically cautious. And if Malaysia can continue to act as a bridge builder, as a stabilizer, and also a consensus builder in the region, and we will be able to remain as a indispensable middle power or country in Southeast Asia evolving security architecture. Well, last but not least, I would like to highlight that while the challenge is formidable, but it's the opportunity. So I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Noor. Nice to see you again. I like the point you made about strategic autonomy being the lesson that Malaysia's learned from the recently intensifying geopolitical conflict. Because to some extent, the main point, I guess, for Malaysia, for Vietnam, for Singapore, and a lot of Southeast Asian states in these conflicts is that the competition hasn't actually forced us to choose sides, but it's actually reinforced the need for strategic autonomy, which, as you mentioned, is pragmatic, low profile, multi-directional foreign policy. Of course, there's differences within ASEAN, like for example, the Philippines notably being different when it comes to maritime disputes. But that's an important point for the purpose of discussion because you mentioned, of course, that it will continue to have soft alignment, issue-based diplomacy, but at the same time, it's not passive because the region advocates for its own interests when it comes to these issues. Now, before I understand you need to leave, you won't be able to stay for the Q&A, but I'd just like to ask you two questions. So number one, while you're here. So number one, of course, strategic autonomy sounds very nice in theory, but at the same time, for example, US President Donald Trump has increasingly pushed with geoeconomic coercion to incentivize countries to break out of open alignment, such as, for example, with the BRICS. So, for example, with the BRICS saga, U.S. President Donald Trump threatened tariffs on member countries. So, has there been a change in calculus for Malaysia when it comes to joining these organizations? Has it been more cautious? Because the main issue, of course, is that provocation is dependent on the great power, right? The definition of provocation is highly subjective, depending on the temporal and also the strategic interests of a given country. So that's my first question. Has there been a change of calculus given the recently very energetic foreign policy by the United States? And then second question, when it comes to the robustness of ASEAN mechanisms, right? So you in a recent commentary, you mentioned that there's crisis fatigue in the region with the Myanmar conflict. They just had elections, the South China Sea conflicts, which seem to be never ending. And of course, right now we have the Thailand-Cambodia border conflict, which Malaysia mediated, but it's really more due to the leadership coming from Malaysia rather than to ASEAN as an institution itself. So in the face of that crisis fatigue, where do you think ASEAN can grow in terms of the response to these crises? And what do you think are the strong points of ASEAN and its weaknesses, possibly?
Thank you very much for the question, Justin. You want me to take it right now or we wait until okay.
No, you can do it right now.
Yeah. Yes, I believe that we're all facing the same situation with Trump 2.0. We're actually getting more and more pressure and also more and more challenge. We are facing a more challenging environment under such condition. But I would say that there will be no significant change in our Malaysian foreign affairs calculus and also strategic calculus, because all this while, right, what we have been doing is that we put our national interest first rather than the interest of the US or the interest of China. So you may see that no, when we try to join BRICS, we get a lot of criticisms, not only from the locals in Malaysia. They are saying that we're actually kind of like choosing sides in doing that. But then we also recently signed this agreement with the United States, right? So it's actually based on what we need, and it's based on actually what is the aspiration of the Malaysian ruling elites as well. So if you know Prime Minister Anwar, he's very vocal and very active in pushing for South-South cooperation, in voicing out for the global South. So I think that's the aspiration. And that's also one way of how we diversify our partnership, trying to be friends with everyone and not, avoid from choosing sides. So I think there's no major or significant change in terms of our calculus. And on the second question is about, the strength of ASEAN is that the question on how we navigate some of the complexity happening in the region, like Myanmar crisis, like the Thai-Cambodia crisis. I think it's very difficult for us to actually break all these things, but what we can do is that we need to ensure that at least we are standing together, right, in facing all these issues. And I know that ASEAN might not work as a security guarantor or provider in the region. I don't want to sound a bit pessimistic, but I think that's the reality. Whenever we talk about security, there's nothing much that ASEAN can actually offer, but it does not mean that ASEAN is not relevant, because I would think that the existence of ASEAN, at least, it brings us together. And it also play a very important role in economic integration. So I think there are these pros and cons on ASEAN. There's no definite definition for ASEAN, but there are good sides of ASEAN. On one thing, it brings the whole region together, so that we can have this greater bargaining power or negotiating power when we deal with other powers outside of the region. And secondly, in terms of economic integration, intra-ASEAN trade is very important and stuff like that. But yes, in terms of security, because we can't deny that there are different agenda and also interests among ASEAN member states. Like for instance, in the South China Sea, not all ASEAN member states are claimants. So we have different expectation towards what ASEAN will do in terms of this issue. So that's something that is there, and we have to deal with it. How do we do that? I think is that dialogue continue to stay united. It might sound idealistic, but I think that's the thing that we can do at this point of time.
All right, thank you for the insights, Dr. Noor. It's great to have you in today's discussion. So now let's proceed to our next speaker. So our next speaker is Mr. Huang Do, an official at the South China Sea or the East Sea Institute at the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. His focus covers U.S. engagement in the South China Sea and the regional maritime landscape. He manages the U.S. research team in the Information Division, whose duties include policy advocacy, tracks 1.5 and 2 diplomacy, and public outreach. He obtained his past degrees at the DAV and George Washington University. He is a former exchange officer in the Vietnam's embassy in the Philippines and former U.S. Institute of Peace visiting scholar in the Vietnam program. So this particular third component of discussion will talk specifically about the maritime disputes, which is high on everybody's mind. So Mr. Huang Do, the floor is yours. It's a good case study of a lot of issues that are applicable or have implications more broadly across ASEAN, namely, for example, multilateral cooperation between ASEAN and other external entities or within ASEAN to resolve the issue. And then secondly, of course, on the implications of undersea cable protection for with respect to military developments in the South China Sea, which is of course of interest to a lot of audience members here today. I'd just like to add that on your point about ICPC limits, right? There's also the question of data disclosure in terms of monitoring statistics for undersea cable damage across the world. And based on my own experience, I don't think there's a periodic data disclosure on what the problem is, where the pain points are. So I think it's very important for ASEAN to have that common operating picture, and maybe they can also add undersea cable monitoring within existing intelligence fusion activities that already exist. Like for example, there's an intelligence fusion center in Singapore. So maybe a possible model would be to add this to the existing arrangements within ASEAN. In the interest of time, so there's one. We now proceed to the Q&A session. So there's one question here. Earlier the speakers talked about ASEAN centrality. However, currently we have seen certain countries pressuring ASEAN member states on critical issues, making it nearly impossible for ASEAN to seek consensus. Can you suggest concrete action or approach that ASEAN member states may take from the angle of defense or economic diplomacy, while at the same time remaining neutral? So I guess I'd pass this to Huang Do. Maybe you can, if you're okay or comfortable talking more broadly about the Vietnamese context with the four no's policy, and then how a lot of similarities exist with the foreign policy of ASEAN member states, and what that means for ASEAN centrality.
Right. I thought that that should be more properly addressed to Dr. Sukontosap, but thank you for the assignment. Well, I think in Vietnam's context, on top of my head, with related to the foreigners exercise, because the questions is about like the concrete actions that ASEAN member can take, right? So in the South China Sea, from Vietnam experiences, what we do is that just a tiny little example is that well, we collectively held ASEAN maritime exercises with ASEAN members, but then also we do maintain joint patrol in the Gulf of Tonkin with China. And the case of Vietnam's and China's Gulf of Tonkin delimitations and joint patrol, joint protections has been cited as an examples of successful delimitations and joint corporations. And at the same time, we just had air carrier visit from the US. So, what does this all point out? It's on point toward our diversifications of exercises in exercises partner in real time on the ground, right? But then at the same time, why we are carrying those exercises, I like the part of the questions where they ask about how to remain neutral, right? We have to explain it very clearly to our partners, our policies, to avoid misunderstanding. So when such a cooperation happened, we rely on public diplomacy, we rely on our ministry spokesperson channel, rather than keeping it hush hushed, right? And then we rely on ASEAN as a diplomatic shield, such as Dr. Jamil talked about earlier, to avoid misunderstanding. So keep on diversifying and keep on maintaining those public diplomacy engagement.
Thank you. Now, on the aspect of economic diplomacy, right? So Dr. Darm touched on this earlier. So do you have any thoughts about concrete steps that ASEAN can take to stay on top of economic diplomacy, while at the same time accounting for, as you mentioned, the trend for bilateral negotiations? Dr. Darm?
Okay. I didn't realize you're addressing the question to me. No, thank you very much for the presentation. And actually, I like Dr. Huang Do's presentation a lot because it represents another perspective on on uh, uh, on regional security issues that we should look at. And and at the submarine cables, aside from being of having strategic importance, they also have a lot of economic importance as well, because quite a few of the countries in the region have the ambition to be the global a part of the global hub of data centers uh, servicing the world, and because of that, the submarine cable routes, the diversification of that is also very important. Now, coming back to your question on how the ASEAN region can stay ahead of uh, uh, economic diplomacy. I, when I decided to come to this webinar with my topic, the reason being that uh, I I believe, at least personally, that we academics and researchers, we don't focus enough on the big pictures. We tend to focus more on issues that we're confronted with. And since this is the beginning of the year, and the title of your webinar, I believe that we should start from looking from the big picture, looking at the environment, looking at the situation where all of us will have to operate in this year, in the coming years. Uh, for example, coming back to what Dr. Huang Do was mentioning about the submarine cables. Of course, we all would want to have as many submarine cable routes as possible, but at the same time, are we allocating enough budget to achieve such goals? And in order to have the budget, that's economics. Not aside from the planning, aside from the strategic thinking, it's always the budget. And because of that, we have to look at how well the countries in the region are doing. Um, and with that, trade and exports come into play. Uh, what the I would say the foreign ministries of the countries in the region would need to give uh, a lot more importance to would be on to pursue economic diplomacy, expanding trade, expanding relationships, commercial relationships, and economic relationships. That's the only way that we can be, for the lack of a better word, that we can be wealthy enough to see how we can spend more on our strategic uh, policies, our strategic ambitions. I would stop at that at this point. But there's a lot more that comes into play, and if there is going to be a second webinar, as you mentioned, I think one of the topics that we also need to discuss would be the gray economy that is actually uh, eating away the wealth and the well-being of the people in this part of the world. And we can't help it, but this part, our region has been pinpointed as I would say the most important global hub of the gray economy that is going on.
Thank you, Dr. Dar. We have a second question from the audience. It's a bit more direct, but you can take this as an evaluative question. So the question reads as, in your opinion, is it high time for ASEAN to abandon the consensus set up, considering the various issues that needed to be responded by the association?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then thank you for the question. I think it's a very good question, and the question that a lot of people are thinking. Uh, I was I was involved in the setting up of the ARF many years back. Uh, when the conference started was inaugurated in Bangkok. At that point in time, there was a lot of talk about the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, which the Philippines will be more or less celebrating the 50th anniversary this year in Manila. I look forward to seeing the plan how the Philippine government plan to do this. The reason why I mentioned about the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia, or we call it TAC, is that um, there is a clause there about the activation of the High Council of the TAC. The High Council actually is being restricted by the provisions of the treaty that it can be only activated in the event that there is a conflict and the parties to the conflicts give the consent for the activation of the High Council. Personally, I would like to see that revised, that the High Council can actually be activated anytime that the member states want to activate the High Council. In that way, the High Council can, for example, have an annual meeting to look at the global and regional environment and do an assessment of what the ASEAN members can do to maintain the peace and security of the region, and also to look into the conflict situations that are going on in the region without the need for the consent from the conflicting parties. And the reason why I'm saying this is because uh, Dr. Noor earlier mentioned about the initiative of the Malaysian Prime Minister on the Cambodia and Thailand conflict. And the way I see it, it should not be the initiative of the chairman, but rather the decision of the organization as a whole. The reason why I'm saying this is because when the conflict started, um, uh, I believe the Prime Minister of Singapore came out to say that this is a challenge to the credibility and the effectiveness of ASEAN in the area of peace and security. I agree with this comment, but at the same time, um, it only shows that um, this is one of the conflict situations that has been allowed to escalate. There are actually a lot of conflict situations in this part of the world, bilateral, multilateral. As long as there is an effort to try to control, try to suppress uh, the conflict, not allowing it to escalate, I believe that can be done uh, within the spirit of ASEAN membership. I'll just leave my comment here.
Thank you, Dr. Dam. That is very insightful. We have a third question from Carson Keller from a master's student at the Missouri State University. I would redirect this question to Huang Do because this is about the South China Sea Code of Conduct. So he's asking, do you think it's possible for the Code of Conduct to be signed anytime between ASEAN and the PRC anytime soon? And secondly, what would ASEAN be seeking within that COC? Is this different than when the push for this agreement began years ago?
Oh, hi. Should I go first, or should we can put up? Okay, thank you. Thank you for the questions. Well, the COC questions, I would like to actually raise that question to Flex Asia as well, as you're hosting, as your country is hosting ASEAN this year. But I think the timing of a finalization of the COC is not as important as the substance of the COC. For example, Vietnam has always stated publicly that we want a substantive and legal COC. And it has to be more concrete, more substantial than the DOC, right? We don't want a hollow, another hollow argument. So I think that's what we should focus on. And I'm not directly involved in that process, so I don't have much information about this, but I do aware that there are significant obstacles that or debates among within the COC negotiation that we still have to work out. If possible, I would like to add one comment regarding the earlier questions about ASEAN consensus and abandoning it. But actually, I would just like to point out the fact that actually, in practice, the ASEAN has adopted the so-called ASEAN minus X formula in so many cooperation where not all 10 or now 11 ASEAN members have to be represented, such as the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum. It started with, just 6 ASEAN countries. So in fact, there have been flexibility in and not giving up the consensus principle, but still exercising flexibility in decision making. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to build on that from a Philippine perspective. So similar to Vietnam, the Philippine position is that, of course, the COC should also be legally binding, which is, of course, the major obstacle there, whether it has an enforcement mechanism or not. So that's something that's being worked out between ASEAN and the PRC. But at the same time, here's a specific forecast for 2026, because the Philippine Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Secretary for Foreign Affairs, has already stated last year that before the Philippines assumed the chairmanship, that of course it acknowledges that there are concerns that the Philippines will focus too much on maritime disputes, which of course is not the totality of ASEAN concerns, right? And at the same time, the Philippines committed that the bilateral disputes will of the Philippines versus other countries will not color the Philippine chairmanship of ASEAN in 2026. So in that respect, I do actually predict it's gonna run its normal course. So Philippines might be averse to be seen as pushing to expedite the ASEAN PRC South China Sea Code of Conduct anytime soon. So there may not. I'm not too optimistic about that being concluded this year. So that's the point. I guess I'd pose the next question to the panel in general, because obviously the strategic autonomy and hedging, it's been the topic of this conversation since the first presentation, right? So, but at the same time, there's countries like the Philippines, for example, that have taken an approach to security dynamics wherein we have increasingly signed more visiting forces agreements or reciprocal access agreements. So we've signed one with Japan, and then we're now concluding one with France as well. So, and we also, obviously, the US has military access in the Philippines. So I think that dovetails the discussion about the ASEAN minus approach, right? But at the same time, what are your thoughts about the limits of that nature of cooperation? Because obviously the Philippines is asserting that by doing these cooperation, we're doing these activities within sovereign territory, and therefore it is not a question that's to be litigated or addressed within ASEAN. It's a sovereign issue. But at the same time, it has regional implications when, for example, the US has forward deployed military assets here in the region. So do you think that this ASEAN minus approach has to grapple with fundamentally incompatible foreign policy postures down the line?
Okay, let me take that first. I'm sure Dr. Huang Do would have his thoughts on this as well. Coming back a little bit on the South China Sea Code of Conduct, do I think it will be a useful tool? I think what we will get would be some clear thinking that is put on a piece of paper. Will it ever be legalized? I think no, we will not see the day that a code of conduct will be legalized. Will it be a useful tool? To some extent, yes. But unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be much of a use. I believe what is going on right now in the South China Sea, the only way that the situation or the conflict can be resolved is by abiding by the principles of international law. And secondly, there needs to be dialogue and negotiations. If the focus is on producing a piece of paper, while there's no talk about the principles of international law and the initiative to have discussions and negotiations, I think we will be left with a fait accompli as it is right now, and it will be more and more increasingly more difficult to reverse the situation. As for your point, Justin, about the ASEAN minus X uh, initiative or the thinking on this. It can work if the X is a small number, for example, -1, -2. But if it is -5, then it is no longer an organization, a regional organization that we would wish it to be. So once again, do I subscribe to the thinking that the ASEAN minus X should replace the principle of consensus? I think that is a very precarious idea to push forward, because if the -1 or -2, even that, we are already alienating some of the members. Earlier, aside from this, there were even talks about let's try to get rid of some of the existing members. So that even go further than the thinking about ASEAN minus X. But for the time being, I would say that for the sake of ASEAN's centrality and at least the image of unity that ASEAN is trying to portray, let's stick to the principle of consensus for the time being. But only in dire situation we can always discuss alternative decision-making approaches. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Darm. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have left for today. So I'd like to take this time to thank Dr. Darm and also Huang Do, and also Dr. Noor for joining us for this program today. I'm sure everybody who's in the audience learned a lot, and of course, thank you so much to the audience for the questions raised here this morning. If you do have any follow-up questions, feel free to contact the organizers, and we can put you in touch with some of the speakers as well, if you have any further questions on their presentations. We hope to see you again at future Facts Asia webinars. Notably, as we've said, there's going to be a part 2 which focuses more on the geo-economic component. If you have any questions or concerns, you can reach us via Facts Asia official social media accounts, which are included in the registration email that have been sent to you. You may also visit our website at www.factsasia.org to stay updated on our latest projects. Once again, thank you to our speakers. This is Justin Makisal from Facts Asia, and thank you and have a good day. Maraming salamat.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.